Private sales on pricing platforms. The comic book hobby was shocked when the news yesterday came out that GoCollect was going to be adding user-generated sales to their platform. Is this a watershed moment in the comic book collecting hobby, opening up a dawn of a new era for transparency within sales? Or is this just going to be used as a tool in the tool belt of unscrupulous sellers to manipulate the market? Joining me now is friend of the channel, one half of the hobby hero, the 99 Newsstand, Manu. It's good to see you, man. Thanks so much for hopping on.
You as well. Thank you for having me. We've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today.
We definitely do. I feel like every time I have you on the YouTube, you know that it's going to be about something important. And I feel like we have another interesting story here. A little bit of context for those who are watching. Yesterday on your Instagram, you dropped kind of the news of the press release for GoCollect's new feature here. Of course, I'll put a link in the description so that people can, check out your post after they watch our conversation here today. But, before we kind of get into it and I ask you a bunch of questions about what you sort of think is going to be, the results of this whole thing, maybe we can kind of take the people through your post a little bit and just kind of give a quick recap on what is going on.
Certainly. Definitely. Well, I mean, the main slide here, private sales being reported and recorded by GoCollect. I mean, for any pricing service to take this step and decide that they're going to incorporate this into any part of what they offer is bold, right? And so a day prior, I put up a story and I said that an established company is doing something bold. And this is very much it. So it says here, GoCollect launches crowd-reported sales. And that's in fact what they call the tab. They're calling it the launch of the tab that's going to change everything or something along those lines. And so anybody can, it says here, upload sales that take place anywhere. And they literally mean anywhere. If you and I sell a book to one another, both you or myself, whoever's privy to the sale could go and decide to say, I'm the buyer or I'm the seller. Introduce the book into the search. Carry on.
Yeah, no, and it's important to point out, in case it wasn't clear, I think for people watching, a lot of people think that pricing services do that already, but that is not the case. Pricing services are very heavily curated. So this is a completely new introduction onto their platform.
A completely new introduction, a daring introduction. I mean, we're going to talk all about it. These reported sales will exist separately as an additional resource to reference. And what they mean here is they do a fair market value sort of charting, right? And these sales are not going to be included into those averages that come from the standard places that their APIs are drawing the sales data from. You'll have that as a reference, as we always had, but this is an additional area to go to and say, hey, let's see what's happening on consignment pages. Let's see what happens at the comic book shops, the things that don't get reported. Additional insight here to stir things up.
Right. Here's kind of the features of what it's going to look like here. I'll kind of take this one. Each entry includes the item sold, comic. They're going to open it up to other things. It'll be its grade, its condition, its details, the final sale price. This is all going to be user generated. You add the location of where the sale occurred, Instagram, a private deal, LCS, date of the sale, and then optional image uploads, and you can show like a proof of sale, and then a link directly to you or whoever enters the data. Anything stand out in this particular slide for you that you kind of thought was interesting?
My favorite part of this is the link directly to whoever's responsible for uploading the data. I like that to promote the sellers if you gave a good deal, or even if you made a great sale and you're proud of it. Maybe it's a really scarce item, no one knows the value, and you get to proudly say, hey, this thing sold for $15K, believe it or not. And here's who sold it. And if you want more stuff like this, come see me, or more deals like this, come see me. And I think that's actually really cool. And it's going to be very important. We'll discuss later on how it kind of associates itself with accountability. Maybe a way to defend against loose, fraudulent activity with this tab here.
Yeah. Here's a little glimpse of, kind of some of the pull down tabs of what it might look like when the feature eventually goes live, and, they're trusting you. Now there's other information, in your post, again, link in the description. I just want to kind of give people context into it. But, it's a really interesting feature. I've made mention on my channel before that, I always thought it was kind of important that we get more data, we get more information, that the grading companies start integrating all of the sales from all of the grading companies like the PSAs and stuff, which I did a video with GoCollect incorporating PSA data that they talked about. But what I found most interesting on your post is I think that the reaction was sort of 50-50.
Yeah.
There are people who kind of are interested in the transparency aspect of it, but there's also people that are apprehensive and concerned. What was your initial sense when you kind of heard about this news and you kind of thought about it? Like, what was your initial reaction?
I'm actually still thinking about it, but the initial reaction was immediate, and it was, how are we supposed to trust these numbers? How do we
Yeah.
trust that what someone's motivation is to report on this sale? Is this accurate? Is it truthful? Is there some agenda here? And I mean, that's an obvious thought, and that's why we see that thought repeating itself in all of the community members that are taking the time to comment. That's the number one concern. That's the number one question. Is there some amount of vetting that goes on here? Or is it literally a very open forum and it's up to the community to decide, oh, that seems a little fishy? And of course, this was smart on the part of GoCollect. GoCollect has introduced the idea of flagging something that seems suspicious. And of course, on their end, they're going to be moderating these things to make sure things seem right. If there's an outlier of a sale, people are going to become curious of it and they'll investigate and decide whether they're going to, I guess, allow that to stay there or not. But my initial thought was, oof, this is going to be a playground for some shenanigans, and it certainly will be. But maybe the defenses they have in place and what they'll do after something gets posted, maybe it can mitigate that risk.
Yeah. I mean, you can very clearly see how it can easily get out of hand if you're somebody who has, a bunch of copies of ASM 300
Yeah,
and you happen to say, hey, I report a sale for $1 million. Would you
yeah,
like to buy my copy? It's very easy to sort of see where that kind of incentive and manipulation can be like pushed and added. And you can kind of look like the hero, be like, hey, look at this, not Swaggle Haas 7782 just posted that ASM 300 sold
right.
for $1 million. And meanwhile, Swaggle Haas's eBay store now has, his ASM 300 listed for 1,000. What a good guy. What a good deal. So I think
Exact. Oh,
that's
yeah.
clearly where, some of this, manipulation can occur. But I kind of feel like this is one of those things where it's like, so be it. I think
Yeah.
that the benefits outweigh the potential cons with this. I mean, do you agree with that? I feel like even with manipulation, it's like, let's just throw everything at the fan, let's just, or sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's just see it all. And if people lie, they lie, but you can sort of do your own self curation as you look at it.
I definitely agree. I mean, even in the marketplaces that we observe currently, there's funny stuff that happens all the time. And it's always us, the community, that points it out. It's not like the auction house says, hey, this was a weird sale. We look at those things the same way we're going to
Yeah.
hear. And going back to initial thought, my second initial thought, if you will, was regardless of whether this is going to be met with some backlash or some pushback or how risky this might be, like, I commend GoCollect for taking such a bold step. This is a daring endeavor. And so I think it's worth doing. I think it's worth giving it a shot to see how this thing plays out, at least for a number of months, for a number of sales being uploaded. Let's see how this lives and breathes. And then we'll decide if it was a good or a bad idea. I mean, we can always go backwards, but it's worth giving this thing a shot. I'm with you completely.
Yeah. I love the idea that like, even if this tanks the market and someone, sold their AF-15 for $10 at a garage sale, and then that gets put into the records, and then people are like, well, that's not a real sale. But it's like, is it not? I mean, it kind of is. I mean, I think that that's like, let it all swash together. That's kind of my stance on this. And
I
maybe
love
that's
it.
not helpful, but I think it's definitely interesting and something that has never been done before. And like you said, I love that they're just saying, hey, let's just see what happens.
Let's see what happens. My hat's off to them. I think it's fantastic. Oh, little bit of a tidbit I will say. When I was speaking to GoCollect, they did mention that it was a conversation that you hosted at the end of the year where you brought this up in the conversation about private sales being, discussed, how people don't really talk about those values. It was, in fact, one of the motivators of committing to this idea. So hats off to you as well.
I did not know that, and now everyone is going to blame me for all of the scams that occur from here on
Good thing
out.
this isn't live. You edit this. No, just teasing. But
Well,
yeah, that's pretty cool.
some of those, speaking of the potential scams, there are certain people, Neo Cards and Comics, who said
Yeah.
things like they think that this should have been only, say, qualified dealers or reputable, maybe sellers
Right.
that are the ones that initially get to do this. But like, isn't that kind of what the pricing service already is? Like for
Oh, yeah.
GoCollect specifically, it's like they're pulling their sales from, I guess it's eBay, which anyone can be on eBay, but that's
Hmm.
public. And then there's, Heritage Auctions and Comic Connect, which are like reputable official dealers. So like,
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you react to a comment like that?
I thought it was insightful. I like hearing Neo's opinion on this. And something else that I didn't know that he mentioned. I agree with that, but I'm also on board with it. Let's just see what happens if this is an
Yeah.
open forum. I'm totally on board with that. I mean, I participate in things like this from my personal sales as well. I'll put up a story or a post about what something sold for. So I'm already one of the people that's very accepting of this sort of thing. But one other thing that Neo said that was super cool to me or informative was he said in sports cards, there are plenty of companies that have plenty of pricing services that have already attempted to do this. And some of them even put these vetting sort of principles or boundaries in place. And they've had to walk this service back, even with certain things in place to make sure a sale was legitimate. They've been fooled a time or two, right? So maybe there's no way to make sure that it's completely accurate. So yeah, let's just go and let's see what happens. This is the first time in comic books, and
Yeah.
that's kind of where I pay most of my attention. So
Yeah, yeah. I saw on your post, some of the words, again, manipulation and collusion. And again, this is just my own sort of personal opinion on this. I'm willing to admit that I'm wrong when this becomes like a terrible thing for the hobby. Hopefully it doesn't become, but let's just
mhm,
say, the worst case doomsday scenario comes of it. I will happily admit that I'm wrong here. But, I see manipulation and collusion being thrown around. But to me, I mean, I kind of feel like there's already manipulation and collusion already in the pricing, ways in which you put. Let me use a softer word. There's
yeah,
curation already that exists so that when a sale for an A15 sells for less, but someone says, well, the colors were a little bit off on that one. So we're going to just pull this into its own little uh, colors were bad
yeah,
category, and it doesn't get incorporated
justify
into
it.
it's like, well, there's already some curation there. And I kind of think like, again, just let everything swash together and let's
Yeah,
see how some of these things play out. But
it's going to
I'm
be fun to see.
yeah. One thing I think is interesting, and I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on this, is, I think a lot of the people in the post sort of assumed and that when you can upload sales info, that it means that a buyer or seller could do it. And a shout out to Lawrence of Mighty Comics, who mentioned that, it would be a good thing to like be able to have a little tab that says that you can say, hey, I was the seller, I was the buyer, because that certainly would inform people from certain perspectives of like, okay, how do I figure out what this number means? But I kind of saw it a different way, and I read into read between the lines, and it didn't imply that it needed to be a buyer or seller. But one thing that I thought is interesting is that it's just sort of implying anyone can post this. Like,
Yeah,
you can just see a sale, that I have nothing to do with, and I can just post it. And to me, this is something that already occurs on things like Facebook and Instagram already. People
yeah,
already will share, a book that sold for a terrible, low amount of money, and then they'll all laugh and they'll be like, oh, look at how, worthless this comic is. Or they'll say like, hey, remember a year ago when it used to sell for this versus, or they'll say, look at this new world record for this book. So people are already doing it. And I think that this will just be more of that. I think people will just use this as a chance to, I don't know, be a social media, like they're the person who just posts all the sales. I mean, what do you kind of think about that? And I guess tying it back to what you mentioned about like kind of the notoriety that comes with, hey, this is the person who posts it.
yeah. No, I hadn't thought about that. I did specifically think about it from, oh, a seller or a buyer can. Like, we talked briefly about some auction houses that don't report. Well, they're not going to be able to stop the buyer from reporting. And now you've
Right.
introduced this element that I am so immediately fascinated by. Like any observer that chooses to showcase or comment on a certain sale in either direction for any reason can, in fact, if I understand it correctly, and I think you and I are understanding this correctly, that anyone can,
Yeah.
upload that sale and turn it into a conversation for their benefit or for, making fun of a situation, like whatever they might have a reason to do it for. I think that's fascinating. You're right. It does turn into a social commentary sort of area. And anyone can introduce or highlight something that's gone on. I didn't think about that. I actually think that's remarkable. And I'm excited to see how much of that goes on.
Yeah, and I think for me, what will really make this interesting is to have them add in some kind of um, social media component or features, at the very minimum, a like
Yeah.
and dislike button, maybe
Yeah.
for each sale. Because then
Yeah.
I think the community will do a good job policing stuff. That people will be able to say like that looks so that's not
Exactly.
real. You know,
Exactly right. And on those phone calls, that idea occurred, right? And I thought, let me mention this. Let's see where they're at with this. I want to see a comment section appear underneath the sale. Like if because GoCollect has ambitions to not just be not a shell. I mean, that's a little too cold, but not just be a company that you go to see prices. They want to be a real asset and a real component in the collectible community. Maybe even share news in the community, maybe inspire collectors, maybe there's certain features and stuff that go outside of the realm of just being a pricing service. But if you really want to connect with the community, if you actually introduce that social component, for instance, let's say I post a sale for something and someone is calling me out on it, they don't think it's real, or they want to celebrate it, whatever, they can actually say as much in a comment and then I can reply. It makes it a social platform, which is like a phenomenal thing if they're able to pull that off. But you just had that thought. I mentioned that to them, and I think they're actually thinking about that. It's not going to be incorporated right away, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does pop up later because it seems kind of smart and it definitely sets them apart from the other companies.
yeah. What do you think companies like Comic Link, who very specifically choose to not uh, report their info to the pricing services or to share their sales data or to leave it up, you can't search on their website for like previous sales and things like that, at least as far as I know. Maybe if you've bid on something you can kind of go back and see what it sold for. But what do you think that companies like that are going to think about this? Because I have the suspicion that it there's going to be a couple of people here and there that talk about their LCS, did a sale here. People at comic book shows might do stuff, but let's be honest. I mean, it's still going to be a lot of work. I don't know if a lot of comic book dealers are going to like take the time to say, here's what I sold everything for. It's going to be a lot, but I do think that there's going to be a lot of people that share comic links specifically, because that already happens on Facebook and Instagram. But what do you think that their reaction to something like this would be? Because it's clearly a choice that they don't want to expose their numbers.
Yeah, it's going to piss them off. It's going to be frustrating for them. That's my thoughts, right? But I like that it's going to happen because I'm not totally on board, or maybe I just don't totally understand from their perspective why they don't want to. And from my perspective, of course, I want those sales to be reported. I want to see
Yeah.
them. So this is that opportunity to have a public place to see those sales rather than to have to reach out to the buyer personally and ask how much they paid or something of that sort. So I'm a fan, but they're going to be frustrated because they can't control this now. So that's interesting
Yeah.
to me.
I do think that it's fair to point out that, you know, in this collecting world, knowledge is power, information is power, and people use the opaque nature to get certain prices out of certain books.
Hmm.
And sometimes, they don't want the transparency for their own reasons. And I'm not going to fault people for that. Like, I understand, especially if they're a comic dealer or a comic seller and they have something that's maybe unique or rare, and they don't want people knowing what things go for or sell for. So I can see the apprehension on that, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see if Comic Link,
Yeah.
is upset about it.
We will have to see, and I've run this scenario through in my head. It's when I sell something to someone, I always ask them, "Do you want me to publicize the amount that you just spent on this?" Right? Because it could be
Mm,
to the benefit of them for someone to know that this value was exchanged, sort of like hold that value because now people are
yeah,
aware of it. Or sometimes if someone's gotten a really good deal and they want to resell, it's to their benefit for them to not announce how much that item had sold for. And so in my situation, I get to kind of create that agreement with the individual, and I'll trust if we decide not to report it that they won't and I won't either. And none of us will be surprised. But from the perspective of Comic Link, they're not having a one-on-one with each buyer, so they can't control it. So yeah, it's going to be fun to see how it plays out.
yeah. So we talked about, the manipulation side from the dealer aspect. Like maybe this is going to be a thing where they say, "Hey, my Jim Lee X-Men #1 sells for $10,000." But I
Yeah,
wanted to read a couple comments from your thread that I thought were interesting. I'm going to read them back to back, and then I kind of want to get your thoughts on this.
cool.
But here's what a couple of people have to say. If the vet system is good, this will become a buyer's market for sure. Why, you ask? Have you seen some of the highly discounted sales on this site alone, being that of Instagram? Talk
Yeah,
about bringing down the book value because a few economically challenged blokes have to sell. Another one here. Here we go. All the offsite sales trying to undercut the eBay and auction sites and their mandatory taxes will now be reported. Here comes the steady, gradual decline of prices in our hobby because last sold will always be lower than the one before that if looking at this system. So a few tanking the market comments with this one
yeah.
here. I'm curious what you sort of think about that. And do you think that this could lead to comic books going to zero?
I think this leads to truth. I think this potentially leads to the discovery of the actual floor because I am guilty of this. When I sell something to someone, if I don't have to pay the eBay fees and they don't have to pay tax on the item, whatever the advantages are of doing a person to person transaction, we are passing not only the savings to the buyer, but also the additional profits to the dealers, to the sellers. We're taking advantage of that sort of arbitrage as it is. But yes, if those numbers get publicized and perhaps it's not supported with the explanation as to why it was sold for less than the eBay sale, it can potentially drag prices down a little bit. But the truth is that is the amount that things are transacting for. So why should we exclude those numbers? We might actually, for the first time now, find sort of a level playing field for values. Maybe arbitrage gets to a certain extent eliminated here. And there's some good to that,
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think back to, a couple dealers who, used to tell me like, "Oh, this book was worth this and I sold it to that guy for this much off. I gave them such a discount, such a good deal."
Yeah,
But sometimes, I think about it when they say that, and I'm just like, "Did you though? I mean, that was what your book was worth, you know?
it's an interesting point.
Doesn't matter that it said that, someone got X number on
Yeah,
whatever auction site. Your book was worth that because you were unwilling to wait to get that number. I don't know. It's very interesting stuff. But like
no,
again,
that's
truth
true.
is going to come out of this.
I think a lot of truth is going to come out of this, and that is actually so true. Like I may have discounted a book, but perhaps I discounted it because I had to. Maybe I did
Right?
advertise it for a
Yeah.
week at a higher price, and cutting the price is what moved it. So at that point in time, that's what the value was. That's who was on the market to buy it for what price. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And and you wanted to sell it. It's like if
exactly.
that is the liquid value. I need
Yeah,
money this instant. That is
yeah.
what it took. So
And you know what else? And also this is about numbers. This is about how many sales there are. It's not just one sale represents the price of a book. See, our friend Justin, Spidey Hits, he says this. The last sale does not define the next sale, right? You
mm,
don't know why that sale happened. So just because that sale was recorded, we still have to think critically. It could have been because someone needs money quick. It could have been for a number of reasons. Maybe the slab was cracked. Maybe the colors weren't as bright as the other copy. We still have to take into consideration all of the sales taking place, and then we determine what we're going to propose the value of our item to be, or what we're going to offer someone for an item that we want to purchase. Taking only the last or the lowest sale into consideration is a bit lazy, and that's not necessarily how value is defined. These just are more data points, but we still have to analyze each book and the entire market of a book to determine what we can get for it or what we might want to pay for it. It's just another tool for us.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting stuff. And one last little thing, just as I think about it, is I kind of just feel like this is just one step of one pricing service incorporating one element and one feature into the thing. I mean, this is not
Yeah.
the entire comic book market, so I don't know how much of a dent it's going to have. And frankly, of the people who buy comic books, I mean, probably you, me, probably people who watch this video are pretty in tune. They're pretty hardcore. Like, they likely are subscribing to some pricing service, but
Yeah.
the majority of people, I don't think they really are. And so, like, even if there's people that are using this to like manipulate numbers, like, oh, this book is worth $1 billion, like, is that really any different than that person walking into a comic show or a seller stream, and the dealer's just like saying this is the price? Like, because if they don't have a pricing guide regardless, like, they're just taking the face value of whatever the sticker is anyway. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, he says that it sold for $10,000 on this thing, and
Yeah.
I guess this guy's got 10,000 here. I mean, like, it's still just you're putting that trust into the sellers anyways, because
Yeah.
most people, I don't think, subscribe to platforms like sales platforms and stuff. So I don't know.
I,
I think that's
I
interesting.
I don't think most people do. And I do think it's interesting to point out that this is free. I mean, you do need a
Mm.
membership to upload a sale, and you do need a membership, I believe, to browse certain elements of GoCollect. And they do have a paid offering as well with other premium services. But if this does catch on, like if more of the community become aware that this tab exists, I really wonder if it becomes a destination even for the casual collector, just for fun, to
Mm.
see, well, what did this privately sell for? It could, especially if they introduce the social element, it really could become sort of like this intriguing destination. But you're right. What makes it different than someone just telling you what they've sold a book for?
I don't know. Well, Manu, it was great to have you on the channel. Thanks so much again for breaking it down and breaking this news. Very interesting stuff. Any last words or thoughts, of where this might lead to comic buying and selling in the future?
I'm still developing the thoughts, but I'm on board with it. I'm going to take this ride with GoCollect. I'm going to use it. I'm going to upload some sales. I'm certainly going to be searching and seeing what other people have uploaded. I'm going to have fun with it. And I feel like if it seems like it is being abused, we're going to have that conversation. We're not just going to let that happen and ignore it. The community is going to govern this. I'm excited about that. And Swag, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Link to your post in the description, as well as the GoCollect press report. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Certainly interesting stuff. Do you guys think that this will be something that is used to manipulate the market, or is more transparency ultimately a better thing? Curious to hear your thoughts. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Manu, we'll catch you on the next one.